Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days to join us for our last workshop. Per usual, as some of you heard, the workshop's being recorded, as all of them are. Today's workshop is From Submission to Decision, Preparing for the Next Steps. Our core team, me, I'm Charles, Samir, Lori, and John are all here, as well as Julia, who is our support person who keeps us all on the road. So today's session, what should you do after submitting your application? So by now, congratulations, you all should have submitted your applications. Then what? Well, we think you should continue to correspond with faculty who you are interested in working with, explore timelines and next steps. Yes, be patient. And keep thinking about what you want to do. And that's purposely emphasized because your research interests, as you may have already imagined, may continue to evolve and take shape as you evolve. So research interests certainly can be dynamic. So keep engaging with whatever keeps you interested in your topic, the topic that you wrote about in your statement of purpose, the topic that is really drawing you to further study. Keep reading articles, talking with other academics, working on projects, etc. And also keep reflecting on what you value in selecting a PhD program. What is important to you? This session will help you address these and related next steps. So, by the end of this session, you should be able to prepare for admissions interviews that some programs will ask you to conduct. Interpret responses from programs. Some of them can be a little complicated if you haven't seen them before, and we're here to help you decipher the important points. Understand considerations for decision-making. We offer our perspectives, and of course, each individual has their own, but we offer some guidelines here. And then plan for campus visits. As I've mentioned, some programs have campus visits as part of their process, others do not. For those that do, we offer some perspectives on that. So with that, let's get started. Here's where we've been in the last couple of months. September, October, we started, November, and then getting into January and March. So early next year is when you can expect to participate in interviews, receive decisions on admission and funding. Those are two different decisions. You may visit schools and then, alas, make a decision. That's what the next few months will bring. First, preparing for interviews. Some, as I mentioned, but not all, include an interview before offers are made. This is just an opportunity for programs to learn a little bit more about you and your skills and your interests and your fit. And it's also an opportunity for you to learn about them. Do not assume that if you're not being asked to interview, that means that you do not have an offer. As we've mentioned, some programs have interviews as part of their process and some do not. But again, interviews are an opportunity for both the school and program and you to evaluate fit. Before your interview, yes, do your research. The people that you talk to may be faculty members who are considering working with you, or maybe a committee member who is conducting additional screening. Look these folks up. If you have their names prior, you can always ask, and do a little recon on them. Find their website, read their CVs. As you know by now, we academics have very public-facing jobs, so you can find out a lot about us and our work just with simple searches. Also, look at their publications. Skim the list. You can look at the titles, you can read further. And if you're interested in working with an interviewer, read at least one of their most recent papers. Think about what questions you might want to ask about it. How does it relate to your own research interests? How did they embark upon that particular study? Look at it in terms of methods. So the methods they use may align with methods that you're familiar with or that you want to learn more about, as well as the actual research questions themselves. Maybe the research questions relate to what you're interested in doing. To prepare for the actual interview, prepare to have a conversation, not read a statement. So an interview is meant to help convey information, context that is not apparent or readily apparent in your package in terms of reading it. So consider how you would answer the following questions that you may be asked. What are your research interests? Why are you interested in this program at this university? Why are you interested in working with particular faculty members? How would you go about solving a particular research problem? And also consider what questions you might ask of your interviewers. How many people are typically in a research group in my area of interest? How are research teams organized in my area of interest? What kind of working relationships do faculty have with students? How much freedom would I have in selecting a research project versus being on a project that you're assigned? And then try to continually connect your research interests with specific faculty members. These are representative questions. You may have others, but this should give you a fulsome idea of what you may be asked, as well as questions that you can ask yourself. Do's and don'ts during the interview. First, the do's. Be professional and dress for the occasion. It is an interview. Plan. Confirm the time zone. So logistics of the interview. Make sure that you're clear on what time zone that the interview starts and how long it'll last. Also, if you're doing these virtually, which many of you will, make sure that your background is appropriate. And it is fine to use a virtual background. Also, ensure as best you can that you have a stable internet connection. Test it out. Make sure that your internet connection is reliable. And of course, thank the person or persons that you're speaking with for the opportunity to share more about your work, and stay focused on the interview. It's a relatively short period of time, but it's extremely important for you to have your most positive appearance and content delivery. Avoid technical issues as best you can. Do not use your phone, use a computer. Ensure that your camera setup is professional. Also, silence your phone. Try to minimize distractions. And then answer questions consistent with what is in your application. So it's a good idea, especially since you may have submitted these a few months ago, to review your personal statements, review your CV. If there's an update to the CV, perhaps there is since you last submitted, be prepared to discuss that with your interviewer. Interpreting responses from programs. When should you expect a response? Well, in December, where we are now, applications in. First offers go out January, February. Again, this is a general timeline. And then offers continue to go out and rejections are sometimes sent in the March, April timeframe. So the next few months. This is a typical timeline. Immediately after receiving a response, note which program your response is from. Many of you are applying to several. Add to your tracking spreadsheet the deadline for your response. If there isn't a deadline apparent, look again, and if not, then ask your contact, by when do they expect a decision from you? If you're declined, do not take it personally. There are many factors that affect the decision. Many of them are completely out of your control, such as when faculty may be available to accept PhD students. There are various reasons, again, outside of your control, that may be factors in the decision, like we may go on sabbatical, we may not have the funding to support you, or we may be going on parental leave, etc. So, in our experience, strong applications can be declined. Keep an open mind about what you might want to do next, again, if you're declined. If you receive no offers, consider master's programs and consider reapplying. I know in my experience and our experience, we certainly have seen strong candidates who end up reapplying for PhD programs. And also think about what experiences can help you improve your application. Have a good idea of what gaps may remain in your background, and try to augment them with, for example, publications or involvement on research teams. Funding. Most PhD offers come with some level of funding. Typically, it's a package that includes tuition, a stipend, and support with health insurance. Funding may be based on an academic year, 8 or 9 months, or a full year, full calendar year, 12 months. Find that out. Consider how many years of funding are guaranteed. Again, for PhD programs, 4 or 5 years is common. And also explore if any mandatory fees are expected for you to pay out of pocket. Funding packages typically ask incoming PhD students to take on research or teaching support roles, such as a research assistantship, teaching assistantships, and load, i.e. time required, can vary based on type and size. For example, how many courses and how large are those courses? Most often dictated by how many students are in the course. And then fellowships are usually the most flexible in terms of the time and what's expected from you. Some general notes. Also, in an offer letter, there should be some mention of advising. Common options are an advisor is named in the letter, or some programs offer students the opportunity in the first 2 years to find an advisor. In those programs, you're expected to get to know faculty in the program and explore research interests and fit. Also, health insurance. Carefully examine the offer's insurance coverage for a partner or spouse. How is that designated? How does the institution or program define that, as well as dependents? Housing. Some students offer graduate student housing and may include these details in the offer letter. And then, of course, as I've mentioned, deadlines. Your response to the offer is typically appreciated as soon as possible, so that if you're declining, that slot may be made available to someone else. But typically, April 15th is a fairly firm date for your decision. Again, as I've mentioned previously, if the letter does not include a deadline, ask for one. Now, what should you consider in making your decision? We have a few items here. First, location. By now, you've done some research on where programs are located. And once you get an offer, you might want to think about more specific factors like housing. What type of housing is available? What does it cost? Transportation options, the community itself. And as I've mentioned, cost of living for housing as well as other costs. The program itself, what's the academic culture there? That's something that you can get some sense for during a visit. What's its reputation? What's the research focus? In computing programs, there are various research focus that may be covered in the school, and you'll want to think more deeply about that. Financial support, also very important. And then a balance between coursework, research, and teaching. As I've mentioned, most programs, in terms of their funding package, require that students will have some teaching responsibility, if not even just to build your experience in that area. And then last but certainly not least, your potential advisor. What are the working relationships like between students and advisors, or your particular advisor potentially and you? Publication impact. How many publications are expected when? And then, of course, overall fit between, again, you and the potential advisor. Also, interrogate the details. These offer letters may be extensive and they may require a couple of reads. Look for coursework requirements. What's required to complete courses for this particular program? Typically 5 to 10, and the expectation is that these courses are completed within the first 2 years. Look at which courses are required. There may be some procedure to waive out of courses based on prior coursework. This varies quite a bit between programs. There are also some programs that may require exams in lieu of courses. Teaching. As we mentioned, an RA-ship or RA is typically required to TA or be a teaching assistant for 1 or 2 terms during the PhD study. For a TA-ship, typically required to be a TA continuously or each semester that you are a student. Master's requirements. If you don't already have a master's, most programs will award an MS at some point along the way to a PhD. But again, this varies quite a bit between programs. The good news here is that there are many resources that can and will support you in making your decision. Consult program requirements and information typically available online. If you've already applied, the assumption is that you've probably taken at least a cursory look at them. Well, once you get an offer, that's an opportunity for you to look a bit closer at what information is specified online in terms of program requirements. Share it with your personal and professional network, family, friends, especially faculty or students at the school. At your current school, if you can, students who are at the school that you're considering attending. And you can get connected to them by asking. Just simply ask to be put in contact with current students who may help you make an informed decision. There may be a doctoral student association or club. You may look for officers in that club who are engaged in these matters, or at least knowledgeable about what it's like to be a PhD student there. And of course, as I mentioned, participate in a campus visit. That can be an incredibly useful experience for you just to get a sense for what it's like to be a student there. Preparing for these visits. As I've mentioned, many, but not all, invite applicants for a campus visit. Most after you're admitted, or at least you have an admissions offer, and some before admissions decisions are made. You typically do not need to accept an offer prior to a campus visit. Make full use of the visit. It's typically sponsored by the program, which means they will make arrangements for you to visit their campus, to meet various faculty and staff, and see the department. Do this even if you're leaning towards accepting the offer. Take the visit. It's an opportunity to network and meet faculty, students, and staff. Many of these meetings during campus visits become the start of relationships that may transcend your PhD experience. If you've already been accepted to the visit and take the visit, Feel comfortable to ask for accommodations so that you can have the best, most informed visit possible. Continued. You may not be able to visit every campus you're invited to. Logistics may not permit that. So prioritize based on the information you need to make an informed decision. For example, you may have already visited a campus, and there's another campus that you're considering attending, and you haven't had a chance to visit it yet. That would be an example of how you might prioritize which campus to visit. Also, if there's just programs that you need more information on, that would be another reason to visit them. And look for itineraries that may optimize your travel. If you're making multiple visits, perhaps there are ways to connect those travel schedules so that logistically it can work well for you as well as the programs themselves. Also, of course, consider your other responsibilities. You may still be in school. You may be working. You may have familial responsibilities. So consider all of that in trying to determine which campuses you might want to visit. If you can't make the school schedule visit day, which is the term that's used, then ask if you can visit during another time. There may be various reasons why you can't make the visit on that particular set of days or days. So you may ask for a visit during another time. You do not have to accept a campus visit, so don't feel coerced into making a visit if you really can't make it work or you're not that interested in it. But if at all possible, as we've mentioned, take advantage of these opportunities and try to visit more than one campus and keep an open mind about those visits. The visits themselves. Consider your priorities or goals and how each offer may align with your interests. Take some time to learn about the area, the town, the city that the campus or program is located in, housing considerations, and then think about what's important to you. Perhaps for some of you, it may be useful to consider how you made the decision to attend your undergraduate institution. What was important to you? What's important to you now? And think about what that might look like for the next several years. Again, keep an open mind and assess priorities. No one program may be perfect for you, but it may make a lot of sense based on various very personal priorities and decisions. Book your accommodations through the university. Most universities have a travel capacity or capability. Recognize that they may have a set schedule for you, or it may be up to you to ask to meet, for example, with certain faculty. But generally, you can expect to meet with faculty, advising staff, and PhD students, and given a campus tour so you can see the area. We strongly encourage you, before you make the visit, to make a list of questions to ask. Think of it like, I do not want to leave this campus visit without having these questions answered. And you can consider asking the same question to different people, just to get a sense for their perspectives. They may have different answers, and that might be okay. What questions should you ask? Well, here is a general list that we put together for you to consider. It's not exhaustive, and there may be other questions that you come up with, but here's a starting point. First, in terms of research and group dynamics, you could ask, what projects are currently or soon to be on the agenda? Do you expect to be taking on new students? What is the departmental and research group culture like? And those may be different answers. The department and a specific research group may have different cultures. Advising style and expectations. You may ask a faculty member if they consider themselves more hands-on or hands-off as an advisor, how often do they meet with students and in what format? They meet individually or do they keep it as a group meeting? And then what is typically discussed? What business or work gets done in individual and lab meetings with students? And what progress is expected from a student during a semester? For example, how many conference presentations should they submit, or papers even, should they be submitting, and at what point in the PhD journey? Do you tend to assign projects topics to students, or are students encouraged to select their own? These are all elements of advising style. Last, student development and resources. What do your students typically do during the summer, especially pertinent for an 8 or 9 month schedule, academic schedule? Are there any specific courses that students in your lab take? And if so, why? More questions. What are the PhD requirements and expected timeline? The requirements and timeline may be sketched out in the online materials. It doesn't hurt to ask to get individual perspectives from people that are there. What's a typical semester course load? i.e., how many courses? You may also ask that question in terms of credits. What happens when a student has difficulty finding an advisor and or funding? This can happen. It's actually quite common. What proportion of students complete their PhD? So out of the students that begin the program, how many end, leave with a PhD, and how many do not? And if you do find someone who's has that information, is willing to share it, you might ask them why. Why would a student leave the program, or why have students left the program prior to receiving their PhD? Here are some questions to ask current students during a campus visit. Can you tell me about the following? Again, these are questions for current students. The academic environment. What kind of support is there for interdisciplinary work? Mentoring styles, particularly for the faculty that you may be considering as advisors and who have expressed interest in advising you. But even beyond that, what kind of mentoring is available? What about professional development? Career support, internships, and positions just after the PhD is completed? And also, what's the social environment like? What are some local resources or activities that students enjoy? What is it like to live in this particular area as a graduate student? We mentioned the culture of a department. Well, how might you assess that? Well, what you may do is ask to meet with students or group of students in private so that you can have a student-to-student conversation about what it's like there. As I mentioned previously, you may ask the same question to multiple people just to get their different perspectives. An example, what does a group or lab meeting look like? How often do students take time off? Are there lab or department outings and events? Do students work together in a common space? Do students get meals together? Do students work late, frequently, or only during or before conference deadlines, for example? And how often are students expected to be contacted by their advisor? And generally, how do those contacts take place? Now, we know you can't necessarily decipher all this content on the screen, but we're giving you an idea of additional questions that you may ask. On the left side, we have advisor style and expectations, research fit and projects, and moving to the right side, funding and obligations, student advisor fit placement, co-advising, and lab culture. You'll see here that we just have more detail around the topics that we've already covered, just to offer that up as an additional resource. Stay in touch after your campus visits. You may follow up with faculty and ask questions that may not have occurred to you during the visit, or that you just didn't get an opportunity to ask. Perfectly fine to follow up. For example, when will they expect to know if they're interested and able to accept you in their lab? And then, of course, if you've made some decisions, presumably you've gotten more information as a result of going on the visit, provide feedback, especially if you've made your decision. As I've mentioned, most of these PhD programs have a set number of slots that they offer. So if you know that you're not going to be accepting an offer, it's a good idea to just let them know. You can also follow up by simply saying that you enjoyed the visit and you look forward to hearing from them. Or you enjoyed the visit, yes, but decided to accept another offer. Always, always be honest. As I tell my students, when in doubt, tell the truth. It's a small world, and you will see many of these people again, especially if you've honed in on a specific area of research and identified people whose research is aligned with your interests. It is very likely that you will run into these folks again and again. As I've mentioned, there are a specific number of slots offered each year. So if you accept an offer, obviously let the department or school program know whose offer you've accepted, but also let the others know as soon as possible if you don't intend to attend their PhD program. What's next? I'll turn this over to Julia's capable hands, and she'll walk us through the end of the slides.
Thank you, Charles. In the meantime, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put those into the Q&A function. You can ask those questions with your name associated with them or not. You can also, as I mentioned, you can do that anonymously or again with your name. You can also upvote any questions and comment on any questions that come in. So if you'd like to see the answer to something, please feel free to interact in that way. To close this out, we would love to hear your feedback about this session as well as the series as a whole. This survey will populate in your browser as soon as this meeting ends or when you leave the session, but you can also access the survey via the link as well as the QR code. Charles, do you mind going to the next slide, please? In addition, because this is our last session today for this series for the fall, if you missed any of our prior sessions or would like to re-review them, you can find them on our website as well as on CRA's YouTube channel. There is a playlist dedicated to these sessions, so you can easily access them there. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then additionally, in addition to the graduate school application workshops, we held some computing research engagement and awareness workshops, which are intended to help students learn more about what research is, how to get involved in research, what a research pathway can look like, what a career might look like for some folks. And so if you're interested in exploring any of these, you're also welcome to review that on the YouTube channel as well as on our website. And lastly, if you know of any students that are interested in pursuing research, we will be reoffering our undergraduate research training course in the spring. It will start in early February and go through mid-April. So if you know of any students who are in their first or second year, maybe even their third year, who have no experience with research, but would like to learn more about research, we highly encourage you to tell them about this opportunity. Students who complete our undergraduate research training course are eligible for unique funding opportunities. So this is a great opportunity for them to get their foot in the door, to get started, to get some support, as well as to build a community of peers. And if you'll be around in the spring, we encourage you to participate in our workshops that are for the Computing Research Engagement and Awareness Series. Lastly, if you would like to stay connected, we invite you to follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. If you use social media, this is a great way to get involved, to stay involved, and to keep hearing about the opportunities that arise. With that, we have finished with our slides. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to populate them in chat. You're also more than welcome to raise your hand and unmute if you'd prefer. I see that we had a question in the chat about the exact dates for when you should hear back from universities if you've already applied for your PhD. We've had our instructors or facilitators respond to those questions, but just so you know that there are no firm dates and you should expect to hear back from programs as early as now, but sometimes between mid-January to late February is typical. The questions that you asked don't necessarily have to be related to the content that we've covered today. If you have any questions related to PhD applications or PhD admissions, we'd be happy to help field them now. I see a question has come in from an anonymous participant. If you have an undergraduate degree, can you still qualify for the research program? Assuming you're referencing the undergraduate research training course, the answer is no. It is really intended for first-time researchers who are currently pursuing an undergraduate degree. That said, if you are enrolled in a graduate program and would like to participate in the graduate student mentor training course, you're more than welcome to apply for that. Another question that's come in, is it common for students to transfer to another PhD program or school if they initially didn't get accepted into their desired program?
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So a student may not get into their first choice. They may start at their second or third choice. And then do they then transfer back to the program that they wanted to initially go to? Is that, I just want to make sure I'm clear on the question. Okay. Um, Gosh, I have never heard of that. I'll invite my other panelists to chime in on that.
So I think what this means is, you settle for something, you really wanted to get into some school, you settle for another school, and then you apply again next year to the school you really wanted, and then you join that school. Certainly there's nothing preventing you from doing that. However, one thing to keep in mind is that you will more or less be starting from scratch at the new program. They may accept some of your coursework. It really depends. They may not. The other thing also is that, it takes time to apply to programs. And if you're applying, if you didn't get in the previous year, something substantial or materially different needs to have happened for your case to be strong enough to be admitted the following year. And remember also that, your letter writers and everybody has to do all the work again. So there are pros and cons. Occasionally that does happen, but it's not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's a common practice. And it's also probably not in your best interest, unless there are really specific circumstances that would drive that.
Another question that has come through in the chat is it okay to go into graduate school applications without publications? Is this the standard?
I would say most students who are applying straight out of bachelor's do not have publications. Oftentimes, many students who are applying with a master's also don't have publications. So it's definitely not a requirement. That said, if you do have publications, that is going to be looked upon favorably, right? At whichever stage of your career, whichever career stage you're in.
I'll agree with Samir on that as well, consistent with my experience. Is there a playlist video explaining what grad schools are looking for exactly in applicants? I'm not familiar with that if it exists. You may review our personal statement presentation in terms of what programs what may get their attention. Are you clearly explaining your research interests? Are you clearly aligning them to what their program offers? That's what generally what those of us who are evaluating applications are looking for. I don't have a great GPA, but good research experience with 3 professors with a publication under review. What are the chances to get accepted, especially in top colleges? I have good letters of recommendation as well. You didn't mention the standardized exam either, and some programs require the GRE, some do not. But if you've got good research experience and you've got good letters and you've got some record of publication, then sure. I mean, what are the chances? I'm not real sure. Year to year, it changes, as well as I've mentioned in the presentation, there are very strong candidates who may also not get accepted. But just know, as someone who's reviewed several admissions, made admissions decisions and who's about to embark on it now, it's really difficult to tell what is going to get admitted and what isn't. So make the application as strong as you can, apply to the programs that are most interesting to you, and give it your best shot and see where the chips fall is the best advice I can offer.
Can I add to that? I think that will answer this specific question and also just provide some general background to answer the previous one. So one is, first of all, we cannot predict anybody's chances of admission to any place because that's for the admissions committees to decide. But I would say second is there may be some minimum requirements for GPA, GREs and all that. But beyond that, this is a overall evaluation of you based on everything in your packet. It's not like a rubric on which people are scored, right? So they're looking at you overall, looking at your record. The publications are taken into account, GPA is taken into account, and then it also depends on fit. So maybe even if you're amazing, but your research interests don't align with any faculty member in the department, that also won't work out, right? So I think it's a matter of evaluating everything overall and evaluating whether you are going to fit with the resources and the faculty they currently have. And if you are worried about your GPA being not as much as high as you would like it to be, that's the statement of purpose or your personal statement is your chance to explain why that is the case. Maybe there are extenuating circumstances driving that. And so those are the things that will be looked at and read during the application evaluation.
There are 2 more questions in the Q&A, but as a reminder, if folks would like to unmute and ask their questions themselves, you're more than welcome to do that as well. So this participant said, is it okay if I rewrite the paper I submitted or paper I published as my writing sample? I just felt like there is room for improvement in writing.
I don't see any issues with that. Make it very clear that this was a published paper and you have rewritten it so that there's no ambiguity as to if somebody does, because I'm assuming the published paper is available online. And if somebody checks and sees that it's the same title but different stuff submitted, and you don't want to give people any kind of room for doubting your intentions. So as long as you make it clear, should be fine.
Go ahead, Chloe.
Yeah, so I asked that questions and I am just wondering, so would that clarification be like in my abstract or Is there any suggestions on how I will deliver this message in my written paper?
Write that as the first sentence at the top, right? This is a revised version of whatever. So that way, before anybody even starts reading it, it sets the right tone.
And this is like a good tip that I should have thought of, but I'm just wondering if I have submitted this as writing sample, but not clarifying it for these three schools. Do you feel like that would be like a really serious problem?
I,
You're muted,
I
so
couldn't hear parts of what you asked, so I
Oh,
couldn't really
sorry.
understand the question.
Yeah, let me say it again. So basically, I should have thought of this like clarification message on my written paper before, but I have already submitted to three schools that I didn't clarify it on my revised paper. I'm just wondering, like, would that consider a really serious problem?
I really,
Clarification.
it's again, right, we don't know how those committees are
Yeah,
going
for
to evaluate that,
sure.
so we can't answer for them. But you could reach out to their the grad program or applications coordinator and say, hey, can you add a clarification to my application? And they should probably be able to attach that.
Got it. All right, thank you so much.
Mhm.
Thank you for your question, Chloe. There is another question in the Q&A. What do you suggest to do if I'm out of years for research REU experience, but I'm intrigued by a possible PhD research concentration? For the folks who asked this question, could you clarify what you mean by out of years for research REU
Yeah, that's what
experience?
I'm trying to understand.
yeah. Thanks,
Is
Julie.
it
I'm not
that
sure what that.
is it that
Go
you've
ahead.
done REUs, but it's not in the area that you're interested in? Or is it that you've never had an REU and are interested in pursuing a PhD now?
I still don't understand what senior level means in this context. I think what we're trying to understand is out of years how, like, what is the issue here? Oh, no more years to do REU, graduating. I think there's nothing required that many applicants, especially those who are coming straight from bachelor's, do not have any kind of REU or research experience, and that's perfectly okay. Of course, having it is going to strengthen your application, but that it's not a hard and fast requirement. So if you don't have it, you don't have it, right? There's nothing, you can't manufacture something you don't have. But you could mention in your application that that's something that you have always wanted to do, and for whatever reason you couldn't, and now PhD is your chance to do that.
How do CS fellowships work? Some cover as soon as you enter the first year, but some industry fellowships only cover into the second, third, or last year of scholarships, and also provide internships in the summer. So I guess if folks could provide a little bit more clarity on what CS fellowships are.
I think so. CS fellowships is referring to the funding provided by the school or the department that you're applying to. Not all schools or departments provide fellowships. Some would. If they do, usually they are reserved for a select few. And typically the fellowship would be maybe for half a year or the first year, and then you would switch to a research assistantship or a teaching assistantship or other types of funding like an SF fellowship or industry fellowships and all that, right? So that's the typical mode. And again, all of this totally depends on the school and the department. John, you seem like you have something to add here?
Yeah, honestly, I don't have much else to add. I was gonna just put in a reassuring, yeah, this varies a lot based on institutions, and you should probably not really have much in terms of expectations, and more be focused on like asking these questions at each institution.
There is a question of fellowships for international students. So again, to reiterate, this workshop series is intended for domestic students primarily. But to answer the question, typically most funding that comes from the departments is not restricted based on whether you're domestic or not. There may be funding instruments that are restricted to domestic students, but otherwise it really doesn't matter if you're international or domestic student. But other types of funding that you may apply for, like NSF fellowships, definitely will have those restrictions, but they're not coming from the departments. They are external to the school or the department.
We are getting close to time, so if anybody has any other questions, now would be the time to ask. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, you will get a survey pop up as soon as you leave this Zoom room. Please complete it. Give us your honest feedback. It's the only way we can improve this series for future iterations. And tell us what you would like to see in the spring if you plan on joining us for workshops then. We really appreciate your active participation and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. This has been really helpful. Really appreciate all your
Glad to hear it.
help. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.